In the book Amazing Grace, Eric Metaxas shared how William Wilberforce helped abolish the slave trade in Britain. Then in his next book, Bonhoeffer, Metaxas wrote about the German pastor who tried to stop Adolf Hitler. Both books were bestsellers. Well, now, Metaxas wants to tell the world about those two men and 5 others who were, he says, great, and revealed the secrets that made them so.
It seems like New York Times best-selling author Eric Metaxas has done it all. He's written several biographies, magazine articles, and children's books. He's even penned episodes of VeggieTales. He's currently the voice of the radio program Breakpoint, which has about 8 million listeners. In his new book, 7 Men, Eric takes a look at the lives of 7 extraordinary men whose faith in God helped them live their lives with integrity and courage.
Eric Metaxas is back with us now. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
The subtitle is the key to all of this: 7 Men and the Secret of Their Greatness. Right. Who doesn't want to know that? Let's start with William Wilberforce, because that was
just want to blurt out, it's vitamin B, and I'm going to unpack that as we talk.
And we're all buying.
Yeah.
You know, we all loved the film Amazing Grace with Wilberforce, but talk about what, from your perspective and the study and research that you've done, what made him great.
Wilberforce, I mean, the secret of their greatness, for every man of these 7 men in this book, what made them great is they made a huge sacrifice. I mean, it's hard to put into words how big the sacrifice was in many of these cases. Wilberforce is the classic case. He gives his life to the Lord and begins to see everything differently. And then he says, I want to live for God. What is God's purpose in my life? So he gives himself and his tremendous talents and energies and influence over to God and accomplishes, I mean, we know him, if you watch the movie, for the battle against the slave trade, this huge battle. That's just one thing he did. If you read My Amazing Grace, you get all the details, but I put all that stuff in the chapter in this book. What he did, you can hardly believe what he did when you give yourself over to God's purposes. But the sacrifice was, he probably could have become Prime Minister of Great Britain. People don't know that. But he says, I don't care about that. I care about doing what God called me to do. Every one of the men, heroes in this book, had that attitude. They said, I don't care about ambition or whatever it is. I want what God wants. It's a huge sacrifice in every single case, but that's why they're in this book. That's why we celebrate them, and that's why they're role models for young men, especially today.
Well, your book about Wilberforce was a bestseller, and so was the book you wrote about Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor who really thought about murder. Now, granted, it was Hitler that, you know...
Actually, not murder. I would say it's different. It wasn't murder, because we know scripturally we're not allowed to murder, but when David kills Goliath, we don't call it murder, right?
It's a different thing. He did a just thing.
It's lamentable. It's sort of sad, but it's a, you know, we give policemen guns not to commit murder, but to protect the innocent. So it's complicated.
So how did Bonhoeffer reconcile that in his own mind as a pastor?
Well, as they say in Texas, some people just need killing. That's a joke, Terry. That's a joke. You can edit that out. No, it's very complicated, and for that full, for the full story, I would say you need to read the longer book, because it's kind of complicated. The short version, which is in the 7 Men book, is that he cast himself on the mercy of God, and he said, Lord, I believe that to protect the Jews of Europe, that you would have us do this. Just like when we take out Osama bin Laden, it's not for revenge, it's to protect innumerable innocents in the future, right? So it's very complicated. It wasn't an easy thing. He was very prayerful about it, very humble about it, but he says, I'm just going to, you know, cast my cares and my actions, you know, before God's throne and do what I think is right. But what he does clearly say is that to do nothing, that's the crime. To sit back and say, well, I'm just going to pray because I'm afraid of committing an error, making a sin. He says, I'm going to do what I do unto God, unto the Lord, and I cast myself on it. You know, and again, every one of the men in this book, 7 Men, has that heart. And again, we need heroes. The real reason I wrote this book is because I think young men, especially today, they don't have heroes. Who do you look up to? Who do you say, that is a great man? What are we telling our young men? We need role models, we need heroes. Part of the reason I wrote the book, and this is in the introduction, is that we've kind of denigrated the idea of heroes in the last, say, 40 years. We don't talk about that. We don't even talk about what does it mean to be a man? What does that mean? In our culture, we're getting really mixed signals, false images of what it means to be a man. And the guys in this book, you know, they're the real deal.
Yeah. Talk about Jackie Robinson, the baseball player who broke the color barrier.
Yeah.
Great film out right now about his life called 42.
Right.
You say that his faith really was what defined him as a man.
Oh, incredible. I mean, first of all, I had no idea this movie would be coming out when I wrote the book. I remember 15 years ago when I was working for Chuck Colson, I discovered about the faith of Jackie Robinson. You know, like all these things, it drives me crazy. I said, nobody knows about this. This man did what he did, this incredibly heroic effort. Why? Because of his faith. He was on his knees every night praying that God give him the strength not to fight back. When he met Branch Rickey, who was the general manager for the Dodgers, this was his whole idea, Branch Rickey was a quote-unquote Bible-thumping Methodist, would not attend a baseball game on a Sunday. He knew that this was a Christian thing to end segregation in baseball, and he said, and I need a Christian man, a man of moral character, who will obey Jesus when Jesus says, turn the other cheek. And when they first met, he opens up a book, and this is not in the movie, right? But obviously it's in this chapter in my book. He opens up a book with Robinson. It's called The Life of Christ. And he turns to the passage in the Sermon on the Mount where it says, you know, do not repay evil with evil, turn the other cheek. And he shares this with Robinson in their first few minutes together and says, do you understand this is a command? Will you do this? Because if you don't do this, this experiment will fail. And so Jackie Robinson, again, like every one of the 7 men in this book, these great men, sacrifices what any worldly person would say, oh, you have every right to hit back, to fight back. If they call you that, come on, you're a man, you got to fight back. He sacrifices the right to fight back for the greater good. And for countless generations of young people. And today we celebrate him. But people need to know that came out of his faith.
Oh, can you imagine? I mean, what a difficulty.
No.
Let's talk about another athlete in the book from Great Britain. Talk a little bit about Eric Liddell.
Eric Liddell. Well, Eric Liddell, folks know the story of Chariots of Fire, and part of the reason I put Eric Liddell in 7 Men is I said there's a whole generation that doesn't even know about the movie Chariots of Fire. I mean, if you're looking for a great movie, well, of course, right? But it's, you know, it's 30 years ago suddenly, and you realize that a lot of people don't know. That's an incredible movie, and that's a movie unlike Amazing Grace or unlike 42, where they touch on the faith, but Chariots of Fire puts it right out there. And of course, it was made by non-Christians, right? Puts the faith, the Christian faith, right front and center. Here's a man, same thing. He sacrifices something. They say to him, you know, if you run in the Olympics, the 100 yards, you will win the gold medal. Everybody knows you're going to win the gold medal. The heat was on a Sunday. As a very serious Christian in that day, he said, I will not run on the Sabbath. I'm not going to do it. And people said, you're crazy. Don't you understand? This is a gold medal. We've never won a gold medal in Scotland. You must do this for your nation. He says, I will honor God. I will not run on the Sabbath. And he doesn't, and I'm not going to tell the rest of the story, but it has an amazingly happy ending that when you honor God, God honors you. And that's all in the movie. But I tell the rest of the story that what happened after the 1924 Olympics, he decides he's going to go to the mission field just like his parents. And what happens there, more incredible sacrifices. Again, just like everybody in this book, 7 Men, he makes sacrifices for God that are so heroic that you just say, I want to be like that. When I grow up, I want to be like that. Incredible selflessness. It's the agape love of Jesus lived out in a heroic, manly way. And you can't not see it. No, you cannot see it, and you can't help but be encouraged by it, which is why I really think probably mostly this book will be given to young men, you know, at graduation or something, because I think that parents and grandparents are thinking about what is my son or what is my grandson and nephew, what are they learning from the culture? Who are the models of manhood that are out there? I don't think there are too many great ones. I just want to plug in as a gift for women, too, because young women, because I think it's such a call to selflessness and service. I want to get to George Washington, because, you know, most of us have seen the picture of Washington kneeling beside his horse praying. But you say that Washington really was great, not as much because of what he did as what he didn't do. Yeah. Well, you could almost say that every one of the men in this book made a sacrifice, didn't do something that was so heroic. And the first example, in some ways the biggest example, is George Washington. We've heard, again, in my intro to the book, I talk about how heroes have been denigrated. Number one, George Washington. We hear about, oh, he was a slave owner, he did that. Okay, so he was certainly not perfect. Now we know, but we focus so much on the negativity. What he did right is so heroic. He was offered, effectively, to be King George I of America. Now, we don't remember this story, but because we're not teaching this in public schools, we're not hearing about this. He was basically offered that, look, we have had military dictatorships, monarchies, there's no such thing as democratically elected presidents. We forget how brave this was. And they basically said to him, you need to, you have won this war, you have done all this, you deserve to be king. Not only did he reject that idea, but he was offended. He said, I have fought for noble principles and I will not give in to personal ambition. And there's other examples of that in his life. And when you realize what he gave up,
we would have been a different nation.
We wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here. I'll be honest. We would not be here.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten through 5 of them. There are 7, and we want you to read the book. It's called, we have skipped Pope John Paul II, who is amazing, and we've also skipped a more contemporary.
Oh, my hero, my friend, the only person that I knew personally.
You say a modern-day Wilberforce, really.
Chuck Colson, I got to tell you, I said I won't put any living people in this book, but Chuck was on his deathbed. And I knew that he was going to die, and I said he needs to be the 7th man in the book. I won't say it now because we don't have time, but the heroic sacrifice that that man made, it is such an example. What he gave up, everybody was telling him, no, you need to do this. He refused. He's a hero. He's an absolute hero. I was with his widow, Patty, and his daughter, Emily, just a couple of days ago. I love him, and I had the privilege of knowing him, but he is such a hero, and I'm honored to make him the 7th man. And by the way, in case anybody's wondering, he bumped Abraham Lincoln.
Wow. Wow. You need to get the book. Well worth the read. For more about these historical figures, check it out. It's called 7 Men and the Secret of Their Greatness. And, of course, it's available wherever books are sold. Always wonderful to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Terry.
Great to have you.